Hello everyone, my name is Gerald Williams, and the case I chose today is Ferko versus NASCAR. I chose this case because I'm a NASCAR fan and I wanted to kind of do something that I knew a little bit of something behind. So starting out, I'm gonna go into a little bit of like background details, and then I'll get into the case at hand, and then we'll get into the laws that are applied in this case. So the plaintiff in this case is named Francis Ferko. He's a stockholder in Speedway Motorsports Inc. Well, I'll call it SMI for now on. SMI is they own NASCAR racetracks pretty much. SMI and ISC, which is I'll get into in the next slide. They both are the main like two track owners in the sport of NASCAR. And Ferko is a Texas native, which we'll get into that a little bit later. This is actually very important, him being a Texas native. So the defendants in this case is the National Association of Stock Car Auto Racing, or NASCAR as I'll refer to it later on. NASCAR is the overarching company over SMI and the International Speedway Corporation, ISC. And ISC and NASCAR are more closely partners, you can say, than SMI is, which will be a problem as you'll see later on when we get into the case a little more. And SMI and ISC own all of the racetracks on the NASCAR circuit but one of them. So this will be also brought up later on as a possible issue. So the racetrack in question is Texas Motor Speedway, TMS as I'll refer to it as at this PowerPoint. They were opened in 1996 with their first race also being in 1996. Track description is a 1.5 mile quad oval. If you don't know what a quad oval is, it's basically an oval shaped track with 4 turns. And this replaced Texas World Speedway, which was in Corpus Christi, and Texas Motor Speedway is in Fort Worth, which is a bigger market. NASCAR wanted a bigger market pretty much, so that's why they moved tracks. Texas Motor Speedway is owned by SMI, which we'll get into a little later. And the hope and promise was that this track would host 2 cup races per year starting in 1999. So I'll kind of dive into the case at hand now. Texas Motor Speedway was promised the second race on NASCAR's schedule when it opened in 1996. But from 1997 through 2002, Texas Motor Speedway only held 1 race. And then in February of 2002, Mr. Ferko, who was, don't forget, a stockholder in SMI, filed a lawsuit against NASCAR and ISC, claiming that NASCAR had breached a contract that Texas Motor Speedway had between NASCAR and Texas Motor Speedway and SMI. And then there was also antitrust law violation claims. And then Ferko was claiming that NASCAR as well as ISC were trying to monopolize the sport. So there's 2 cases that will be at hand here. There'll be a breach of contract as well as antitrust laws that we'll be getting into later on. So as I said previously, the violations in question include breach of contract laws and antitrust laws. We'll start with breach of contract. This occurs when there's a non-performance of a legal duty, and then a legal duty would be a responsibility to others to act according to the law. So in other words, if you don't do what you say in a contract, you can be sued for it. And then antitrust laws, the goal here is to preserve competitive marketplace that furthers consumer welfare. This includes competition laws, which are used to protect against predatory business practices. The Sherman Act, we'll also talk about this a little bit later. This is intended to prevent monopolization, attempted monopolization, as well as conspiracy to monopolize. And then monopoly, the definition of that is enterprise that is the only seller of goods and services. So I'm going to dive a little more into the antitrust section of the laws here. In order to prove monopolization in this situation, SMI has to prove that defendant has monopoly power in the market. Monopoly power, I'll dive into that a little later on. And that the defendant is willfully acquiring and maintaining power rather than growing or developing power. And then attempted monopolization, this entails the defendant engaging in predatory conduct with intent to monopolize and possibility of achieving monopoly power. Now, attempted monopolization, I'll get into that a little bit later as well with monopoly power. Now, the second point, the defendant willfully acquiring and maintaining power rather than growing or developing power. Before Texas Motor Speedway was built in 1996, the NASCAR schedule had not changed at all pretty much since the mid 80s, which I'll get into that a little later also with monopoly powers. So at the time of the lawsuit, ISC owned 12 of the 21 tracks in which the NASCAR Cup Series raced at the time. going back to the definition of monopoly power, is when a single firm owns more than 25% of a particular market. ISC owns 12 tracks on the circuit at this time. They own tracks such as Daytona and Talladega. Then SMI only owned 8 tracks, which were Texas and Charlotte were two of the big ones that were included. And then New Hampshire Motor International Speedway Corporation, NHIS, owns 1 track, which is New Hampshire Motor Speedway. They're pretty much included, so it doesn't look like the ISC and SMI are totally monopolizing the sport in a way. So as you can see on the lovely pie chart here, ISC is in the dark orange and they own 57% of the tracks. And then SMI is in the light yellow color and they own 38% of the tracks. And New Hampshire International Speedway, or New Hampshire Motor Speedway as it's called now, owns 5% of the tracks on the circuit, which is 1 track. So as you can see, for possibility's sake, if for some reason ISC acquires New Hampshire Motor Speedway for some reason, they would have 62% of the market compared to 38% of the market, which entail, as you saw in the last slide, monopoly power means you have 25% or more of the market. So monopoly powers, they would have it here, and an attempted monopolization as well. And the attempted monopolization in this case would be ISC actually growing for once, but for the 10 or 15 years previous to that, didn't really grow. They just kind of went like, we're kind of good. We own 57% of the tracks. We'll just stand pat and just leave the schedule as is. So the real question is, does Ferko have a case here? So SMI claims that between 1996 and 1998, Bill France Jr., which his picture is down in the bottom corner, as you can see, his NASCAR's president at the time, says that Texas Motor Speedway will have a second date no later than the 1999 season. Sam Cherry, who was the head of a lawsuit against NASCAR, also claimed that NASCAR's refusal to give Texas a second date kept SMI stock prices down. So entail, yes, that there is a breach of contract law that's been violated here, as well as antitrust laws here that have been violated. Also, it should be noted that NASCAR did try and make the case, just try and get Ferko out of it pretty much, period, because in their opinion it was SMI versus ISC at this time, but that failed later on in court as Ferko's being an SMI stockholder. That's why that didn't go anywhere. So a possible defense that NASCAR and ISC could use in this situation is, since there's 2 separate legal issues at hand here, antitrust laws and breach of contract, a defense they could use is just separating the legal issues entirely. The antitrust issues will be between ISC and SMI, since ISC seems to be monopolizing the tracks from SMI on the NASCAR circuit. And then the breach of contracts area will be between SMI and NASCAR, since ISC had nothing to do with Bill France Jr. and NASCAR not holding up their end of the contract. Personally, I don't see really how this defense could work due to the fact that NASCAR does not like drawing things out negatively. NASCAR hates negative publicity, and honestly, the sooner they can get this over with, the quicker it is, better it is for them in the long run. So the question is, how is this resolved? Because NASCAR and ISC, they got caught red-handed, breaching contracts and violating antitrust laws. SMI and Ferko both have a legitimate case here for both breach of contract as well as antitrust violations, due to the fact that ISC and NASCAR did have a monopoly on the racetracks, and with Bill France Jr. really not following through on his contractual promise to get Texas Motor Speedway the second race date. So NASCAR here has 2 options pretty much. So NASCAR can pay SMI as well as Ferko a bunch of money in order to settle without changing up the schedule at all and the racing schedule at all. And then the other option is to change the NASCAR schedule to even out SMI and ISC tracks. So it'd be pretty much 10 racetracks that SMI owns on the Cup circuit, 10 for the ISC that they own, and then keep New Hampshire as the one kind of third party in this scenario. So will this case lead to NASCAR changing their schedule? Personally, I believe that NASCAR will have to alter their schedule in order to prevent future antitrust law violations. And evening out the playing field between SMI and ISC would be the best way to ensure that NASCAR doesn't lose money in future lawsuits and endeavors. Another option here could be NASCAR just saying, the heck with it, we're just going to buy SMI and ISC just to make sure we don't lose any more money and prevent one company from trying to monopolize the other out of the market. Another thing that NASCAR would have to take into consideration here is their fans are pretty crazy. I mean, they really, if they're season ticket holders for a track, they're season ticket holders forever. So making sure that the fans are still happy too is something that NASCAR also needs to take into consideration here with changing their schedule, as well as sponsorship dollars, because NASCAR runs on the almighty sponsorship dollar. So I got curious after doing all this research, and I actually found the actual case results that resulted from this case. So they ended up settling. ISC ended up selling Rockingham Speedway to SMI for $100 million. SMI then transferred the Rockingham Speedway race to the second Texas Motor Speedway date, which in turn ended up shutting down Rockingham Speedway pretty much. And then ISC would take that money that they sold Rockingham with, and then purchase Martinsville Speedway from SMI for $192 million. ISC then closed down Nazareth Speedway, sold it off. That track is now defunct, shut down pretty much permanently. Then ISC ended up swapping one of its two Darlington raceway races to SMI so that Phoenix and SMI track could have a second date, pretty much just balancing the schedule out between ISC and SMI. So case results continuing here. NASCAR did not have to pay any money out in the settlement to SMI, Ferko, anybody like that. SMI and ISC then had a competitive balance, like I said, in the Cup Series. Mr. Ferko was later fired from his job and forced to move out of the state of Texas due to the publicity he encountered due to the lawsuit. He's still a shareholder in SMI. I did some research on that, and that actually should say as of 2020, NASCAR now owns both ISC and SMI, which in turn this eliminates the issue of being sued due to monopolization with one company or the other. And we've reached the end of the presentation. If anybody would like to dive in and take a look at some of the links, there they are right there. Hope you guys enjoyed this. I know not a lot of people are NASCAR fans, and I get it totally. NASCAR is not everybody's cup of tea, but I hope you guys enjoyed it, and hope you guys want to do a little more research on it. Thanks for sitting through my presentation. I know I'm a little shaky when it comes to presentations, and thanks everybody for a great semester.